The focus of this course on shamatha and vipassana comes actually from the Buddha. The Buddha highlights that there are three major fields of knowledge. He talks about the knowledge that comes from tradition or scripture or oral transmission. You have a field of knowledge that comes from reasoning, and you have the field of knowledge that comes from direct perception. And at one point, he's questioned about what he emphasizes, what his main field of knowledge is, or what the main field of knowledge that he propagates is. And he says it's the third one, is direct knowledge. It doesn't mean that for him the other two don't have function, but he emphasizes the third, and that is why he, in that meditation training, will put the third one in the center. Not disconnected from the other two, but making the other two, how to say this, contributory to direct knowledge. And there's a number of ways that you could approach this. First of all, when we talk about shamatha, and I said earlier that the way to look at shamatha, I would say, is to make the mind more natural, is to heal the mind. And I think to do any type of practice, we need a measure of shamatha practice. Now, our minds are chaos. Most of what happens in our mind, we don't even remember, we can't track. Now, there's zillions of thoughts every single day. And at the end of the day, we remember nothing of this. This is just one big chaos that flows and flows. And that just is distracting. And this bulk of thoughts makes us anxious. It creates a sense of, I would almost say, fear. Because most of our life we are not present to. We live in a world mostly that is second-hand. But because our world is second-hand, we don't see reality really well. And that means that we always have this implicit sense that our actions are under-justified. Now, we would like to act the right way, but we always have this inkling that we might not have enough information to act to begin with. And much of that comes from the constant second-hand chatter in our minds. So shamatha, I would say, is a precursor. It brings calm to the mind, makes our mind focused, but it also brings peace. It suppresses, well, we use the word suppressing, but I don't like that word much, I must honestly say. It helps the mind to see for itself that hatred, that desire, that doubt are unhelpful, unskillful. That we don't feel very pleasant when they're there, and especially with regard to desire. No, we live in a desire realm, and we live in a society that tells us over and over that to desire things is actually very pleasant. That is a good thing. That is something that we want. No, when you don't desire, is anything going to happen in your life? But in reality, when you look at it, when you observe what happens within you when desire arises, it's in fact is very unpleasant. You know, you can be present to your life, or you can desire, but these two exclude each other. Desire just brings unrest. And so that is what shamatha does. Shamatha forces you to look at yourself. And by seeing that these processes are not helpful, the mind just over time learns to let them go. Then the mind becomes transparent, the mind becomes alert, the mind becomes present to the present. And then, then we have a good basis for all other practices that we need, at least to some extent. I don't say that you need to achieve higher concentrations. That's pretty difficult. But any measure to which you can calm the mind is very helpful, both in terms of a meditative practitioner, of being a practitioner of the Dharma, as well as just for the enjoyment of life. The Buddha has like a critical attitude with regard to both tradition or oral transmission or scripture, whatever you want to call it, and logic. He says with regard to scripture, and I think that is undervalued sometimes, is that we like even when we look at our own scriptures, you had to use that argument of the Buddha. We don't have the word of the Buddha, we have a transmission of the word of the Buddha. Now we have a transmission that has gone across hundreds of generations and comes to us through that way. Now, and the sheer fact that we have different Buddhist traditions show that the way people understood the word of the Buddha over time influenced our scriptures as well. That does not make them invalid, but that means that to look at our scriptures without reasoning, without exploring them ourselves, is not a pathway in and of itself. Simply because it is in the scripture, does not necessarily make it right. On top of that, as the Buddha highlights, the word might be right, but we might misunderstand what it actually says. Now, the Buddha always spoke in context to specific people. And of course, society, our cultures and societies changed over the past 2,500 years. So, of course, part of that is captured, is protected luckily by tradition, by transmission itself. It comes from hopefully living, experienced meditators that pass on this material to you. But at the same time, I know this cannot be taken at face value. And so scripture requires reasoning as well. But then the Buddha says, well, reasoning has quite similar problems. Now, reasoning, well, I would say at best, reasoning proves the relationship between two things. And that relation already is quite difficult to establish. But then even still, when the thesis is wrong, then I might establish a relationship, but that is a relationship between one wrong thing and another wrong thing. Now I might establish that unicorns are vegetarians, but unicorns don't exist. The reasoning is correct. I might say something about the teeth of a unicorn. And so the reasoning might be right, but unicorns are not vegetarians because unicorns don't exist at all. The ground of knowledge is from direct perception. And so in that meditation training, we will use tradition, obviously. The reader that people will be provided with is collected from sutra, mostly. We will definitely use reasoning, specifically from the Tibetan tradition. But we need to go back and back to looking for ourselves. It is only there where the Dharma really becomes transformative. Now, I must say that looking in and of itself equally has dangers. And that might be approached in one interesting way, is that you could say we can use reasoning in a constructive manner, and we can use reasoning in a deconstructive manner. And the constructive manner, saying this is like this because of that, sound is impermanent because it is a product, it would be a constructive method. The other side of this is deconstructive logic. And that is specifically in our tradition what we actually use the most. And when we are talking about the way things exist, then we are called prasangikas, consequentialist. So instead of giving a positive argument, we question what we see. And I think of the two, of constructive reasoning, and both have their place. But I think in general, the relationship, the balance between constructive reasoning and deconstructive reasoning falls in the favor of deconstructive reasoning in meditation. On the one hand, scripture and reasoning on their own, the listening, there's another formulation of this, listening and reflecting, they help us, on the one hand, not having to reinvent the wheel on our own. And I would say that reasoning sharpens our intelligence. It teaches us to, on the one hand, it calms our minds. It learns us to think in a deliberate way instead of a random way. So it's a very good way also to harness the power of our conceptuality, because our conceptuality is very important. And it gives us familiarity with the Dharma. It makes that we can hold these teachings. But then they need to be tested. And then to explore together, like how then you verify such things in meditation. That is where vipassana comes into play. To really then give grounding to see for ourselves, indeed, whatever is produced is necessarily impermanent, because I have seen it for myself. Now I understand. And then your Dharma practice gets footing. And then you have a true underground on which you can start to construct what we call enlightenment.